Welcome to Out of the Best Books, a podcast where we pull down a book from our Deseret Book library to get a little more insight into our authors, their inspiration for writing, and their life. I'm Cole Wissinger.
And I'm Sarah Collins, and we are your hosts. Today, we have author Stephen Collis to talk about his most recent book, Habits of a Peacemaker, 10 Habits to Change Our Potentially Toxic Conversations into Healthy Dialogues. Stephen is a law professor at UT Austin, an accomplished public speaker, and of course, an author. Hi, Stephen. How's it going?
Great. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Thank you for coming. How's it been coming out in Utah?
It's wonderful, but very, very busy. It's kind of been a nonstop whirlwind of TV interviews and lectures and meetings and book signings.
Okay.
That's good.
What's been the best? What's been the most surprising?
Last night at BYU, we had a student gathering that was just bursting out of the room. Way more students than the room could hold. I thought that was really wonderful.
Make you feel like $1 million.
Yeah, that's right.
Right for you.
But more importantly, it was a lot of students interested in peacemaking. It wasn't me that drew them. They were excited about the topic. I think they were hungry to learn how to have productive conversations about hard topics, and that's why they came.
That's amazing.
So let's nail in on that, right? Start with the title of the book, and I'm going to read it, right? Habits of a Peacemaker. Again, 10 habits to change our potentially toxic conversations into healthy dialogues. You also have building bridges, healing relationships. How do you bring all that together? Like, well, what's the...
Sure. So I define a peacemaker in this book particularly as somebody who can have productive conversations about hard topics. And hard topics are not just political topics. It's our family dynamics. It's conversations we have at work, between spouses and in the home. At church, there's all sorts of situations where difficult conversations arise, and we need to be able to navigate them. And that's what the book is focused on. So it's not really about politics so much. It's just habits to be able to have productive conversations about any type of hard topic.
Yeah, that stood out to me, actually. The way that it was about any kind of hard topic, both like through political a lens, through other lenses as well. I want to know, what was the backstory? I have a hunch it has to do, maybe, is this on the heels of Peacemakers Needed? What was the backstory? What were you doing that led you to writing this book?
Actually, so the idea for the book came out long before President Nelson's talk on peacemaking.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So I am a First Amendment law professor, and I travel all over the world talking about issues related to the First Amendment. So, First Amendment covers speech, religion, and the press, as well as the right to peacefully assemble and petition the government. From those freedoms, there's all sorts of controversy, right? I mean, LGBT plus rights, abortion rights, how to interpret the Constitution, academic freedom. It just goes on and on and on. Those are really controversial topics. And what I realized is as I was traveling around the globe and I would talk with other people at conferences that we were having productive conversations despite our disagreements. And so the thought came to me, what are we doing? What habits are we engaging in that is allowing these conversations to be productive that maybe other people are devolving into just fighting?
Yeah.
And so I thought it'd be great if I could really do the research, figure out what habits we're engaged in, and then put that in the book to kind of pass on to others. That was the kernel for the idea. I actually pitched it to my publisher, Shadow Mountain, and they said, we don't really think that's very, we're not really interested in that. Then President Nelson gave his talk, and suddenly they were really interested in it, right?
Yeah.
But what's funny about that is, in between those two things, I started to have a lot of agents in New York who got really interested in it, and so they were pressuring me to go more with a New York publisher and away from Shadow Mountain. But thankfully here, I love working with Shadow Mountain. They have a great team. They've been so supportive, and so that's kind of the short story of how the book came to be. Yeah,
For sure.
Yeah.
Let's crack it open. It's got 10 habits, and so it's very easy to structure through here. One of the parts that I bookmarked was especially in chapter 2, and I love just throughout the whole book, things built on each other really, really well. So chapter 1 is about how we don't really know anything, and then chapter 2 is telling us how we can learn some things, right? So dive a little bit more into this, how to gain knowledge, and you talk even towards the end of the chapter about how spiritual knowledge can be a part of that too.
Yeah, so, it's important to emphasize that this book is for all audiences, right? And it's not just for Latter-day Saints, and it's for believers and non-believers alike. And so I had to be careful about ensuring I was kind of thinking about all types of people in that regard. So you're right. Chapter 1 is trying to convince us all that we really don't know anything. That's my whole goal with chapter 1, that none of us knows as much as we like to think we do.
Yeah.
Chapter 2 then was, then how do we actually acquire knowledge about things? And so I do talk about how to be aware of how we're being manipulated by technology, especially social media and smartphones, and how to understand how all that's happening. And then I move into, once we realize we're being manipulated, how do we then start figuring out how to actually gain knowledge about any given topic that's out there? And, a very simple bit of advice I give, or a habit that I think people can engage in, is whatever topic you're interested in, you start by realizing you don't know anything, even though you think you do. You realize you don't know anything. Then you go and you need to look for at least two sources who have different biases, right? And then you read those two sources, and that at a minimum will give you at least some fundamental knowledge about it. Not very much, but at least a little bit. That's one habit. I talk about others. And then you're right, at the end I talk about spiritual learning, that for many people in the world, the most important truths that they have in their lives come through spiritual learning. It's not necessarily through reading news or blogs or opinion pieces, right?
Yeah.
It's their experiences with the divine. And I talk about how important it is not to discount other people's spiritual learning, and to show respect towards them. And also for people who engage in spiritual learning, not to be disrespectful of people who have other methods of learning. And so I talk and give examples of people on both sides of that divide. People who believe only in secular learning, but who are very respectful of people who believe in spiritual learning as well. And then I talk about people who very much believe in spiritual learning, but also talk about how those same people respect other methods of learning, right? And it's really critical to kind of understand that we can learn both through what I would call like enlightenment methods, the scientific method, reason, logic, and evidence. That's an important way to learn, but that we can also learn through spiritual methods. And for many of us, like I said, those are some of the most important truths we have in our lives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, the part that I bookmarked out of this book, and to be honest, I before I even get to mine, because mine is chapter 4, which is don't feed people's worst fears. That's the habit recommendation. Now, going back to your backstory where you said you'd observed the way that students and the people in your field were able to have these healthy conversations when you stood on different sides of whatever aisle, right? Were you afraid or intimidated to take on a topic like this?
No.
Really? Okay.
I mean, maybe I should have been. Sometimes I have misgivings, I guess. But on that, not feeding people's worst fears, this has more to do with how we behave in our lives prior to having a conversation. So much of the book you'll find is much of the book is about techniques you can use in the middle of a conversation, but much of it is about what we do in preparation in our living.
Yeah, it's the personal development.
That's
absolutely.
Right. And so the not feeding people's worst fears part of this is, if you want to be able to have a healthy conversation with someone about a really difficult topic, they need to know that you're not a monster or a fool.
Yes.
Right. And so that all comes down to how you live your life in the day to day. Do you treat them with respect? Are you kind? Are you looking to lift them up? Are you seen as somebody that's only interested in your own self-interest, or are you somebody that they respect because they know that you're selfless and looking out for them, right?
Yeah.
We don't want, if people assume that because of our particular position on a certain topic, if people just assume that if you have that belief, you must be a monster, the worst thing you can do is behave like a monster, right?
Well, in fact, the quote I picked out, this is page 125 of your book, it says the worst thing we can do is behave exactly how people fear we will. Yes. I think that's what you're speaking to, right? And I think the reason this chapter jumped out at me was like almost a pulse check for like, how are you behaving? Letting my emotions maybe get in the way of those peacemaking at time. But then you were able to balance, like dignity as well in this chapter. Can you speak a little bit on that?
Yeah. So I think it's very important that there's an aspect of human dignity that we talk about. Scholars in my field talk a lot about, well, where do human beings get their dignity from? In other words, and dignity is, you might think of it as that aspect of humanity that makes us different from, say, animals or plants or other living creatures. Why should human beings be treated differently than any other organism on the planet, right? And, for people who have a belief in the divine, that's easy. You say, well, they're children of God, and that's why they have human dignity. But there's another aspect of dignity that has that philosophers have thought about over the years, which is human beings are the only creatures on the planet who have the ability to kind of deal with their world in a rational way, to look at the environment around them, to situations that come before them, and really process it and think about it and not just move on instinct, right? That sets humans apart. And the argument I make in the book is we all want to embrace our dignity. There should not be topics that get us so worked up and overly emotional that we can't embrace that part of our dignity and talk about it and explore it and think about it rationally, right? And if we have those types of topics, which we all do, we all have something that when someone says it, we get all worked up and emotional.
You can like feel it, right?
Yeah.
Somewhere in your chest, you recognize
right,
that.
Right. At BYU last night, the topic I gave was a Ute fan talking trash about BYU.
Oh.
I figured that would get all the BYU students worked up, right?
An age-old argument.
That's right. But we all have something like that. Yeah. And so what we need to do is recognize which topics are like that for us, that get us so emotional, it becomes impossible for us to deal with them rationally. And then we have to take steps to be able to kind of calm those emotions. And I talk about, there's cognitive behavioral therapy and other methods you can use where you expose yourself to this topic. You intentionally go and expose yourself to these topics and arguments against your viewpoint in small but healthy doses, so that over time, once you're exposed to them, your emotions don't peak the way they do if you're siloed off and kind of kept safe.
Absolutely. Yeah, which is, it leads to other parts of the habits, which is to be educated on things and look at things from both sides and always know the arguments against your point of view. I think those are so incredible.
Leading down to like number 9, you say seek inner peace, right? That's whenever I was trying to figure out which one I was going to like focus in on, I was trying to decide between, is it a habit that I already find easy for myself and so I just naturally like it, or is it one that would be hard for me? And so seeking inner peace about the things that are really hard for us is going to be hard for anyone.
That's right.
Like summarize a little bit of that.
Yeah, so chapter 9 is about seeking inner peace. And the idea there is if we are in a place of emotional peace internally to ourselves, that makes us able to have much more productive conversations with people about any number of topics, right? And so there's lots of ways to do that, including spiritual ways. If you're a spiritual person, I assume most of this audience is, prayer, church service, temple attendance, spending time reading long-form books like the scriptures. Actually, science has proven all of those things lead to a much more peaceful state of mind. Wow. And then there's other techniques you can use on top of that, like learning various breathing techniques, learning mindfulness techniques, meditation and prayer both kind of go hand in hand with one another. Long form reading generally, I love that we're in a bookstore, right? Like just reading books instead of reading social media actually has a proven effect of helping people maintain an inner peace. Journaling is another really productive way of maintaining inner peace. So one thing I would recommend, like a habit you can get into, is if you know there's a topic that gets you just really worked up and angry, journaling about it. Why you feel the way you do, what evidence there is for the way you feel, what evidence there is against it, why people who might disagree with you are not monsters or fools,
That's
spending,
a hard one.
Yes, that's right. Spending time journaling about that can actually bring you to a place of inner peace so you can have much better conversations and healthier conversations about it.
Has writing a book been therapeutic for you? Like in that same vein of, right, it's not so much a journal here, this is literature.
But it's observing the world that way.
That's right. But there's also, I do share a lot of anecdotes in there, which did require some internal reflection. And I mean, yeah, any book is a project of self-exploration along with just writing the content of the book. And there are, like anything, this book is about becoming. And it's not becoming something better than we are, which is a lifelong journey. So there's been plenty of these habits where I'm like, yeah, this is a really good habit. I kind of stink at this one, right? Like one of the habits is...
Tell me. Are you perfect at all 10 of them?
One of the habits is like spending time with people, doing things other than talking about hard topics, right? Like just enjoying time with people. And I give all this historical evidence and instances in history of why that proved to be incredibly fruitful. That's my hardest one. So there's a reason this is my profession. I like talking about like difficult constitutional problems and societal issues. It's my job as a professor. I just love doing it. And what I find is like most people don't really. They'd rather just like watch the football game and tell Steve to shut up. Yeah. So like I have to learn how to just hang out with people and not just want to sit there and talk about these issues that I find interesting.
Okay, I'm cut from the same cloth because this is so interesting. It's been newly on my mind. I have a couple of friends that we just, due to our situation in life and whatnot, we talk about the same things together over and over. And one time we had to like call each other on this and say like, there's more to us than just this one thing that we talk a lot about because it's the forefront of what's going on in our lives. Like, let's get back to those things, those other things we might be interested in. So that's an interesting approach to peacemaking. I hadn't thought about that.
Right. And the example I give from the book is actually based on some really great research by a constitutional law scholar named Derek Webb, where he went back and he looked at the founding of the United States, and the drafting of the United States Constitution really seems like it should have been impossible. The likelihood of these people coming with all these disparate beliefs and interests representing these different colonies who were all at each other's throats suggests they never should have come out with anything that would have worked.
Yeah.
And part of what he proves in his research is that one of the reasons they were able to pull it off was that they were all put into an environment where they were forced to spend a lot of time together because there were not very many inns. It was not like today, right? There was like a few inns. Some of them had to sleep in the same beds, and they were sharing all this really close space. And there was only a few restaurants. So when they weren't actually in the Constitutional Convention working, the only option they had was to go hang out in these other places and just spend time together. And that caused a lot of the tension to get diffused, right?
Whole third space
That gives
stuff.
me goosebumps.
Yeah.
That's cool. I didn't know that. Wow. Well, okay. So speaking of this, let's move on to a little bit more of like the fun section to get to know Stephen a little bit better. You say this in your book. You've talked about this now. You're really passionate about the First Amendment. And just if we were to give you 10 minutes on a podcast or to give a presentation for fun to teach someone about something, no prep at all on this topic, right? You're thrown into this. Would that be the topic you're going to speak on? Or is there something out there that you're like, no, give me 10 minutes. I could get you I think Coles would be something about the Venn diagram of movies and sports.
Yeah. We all got that one, right?
Yeah.
What if I was thrown in front of some random audience and said, you can talk about anything you want?
Yeah, entertain me.
And you got to fill 10 minutes of time.
Are they church members?
Sure.
If it's church members, I'd probably be a little bit more interested in talking maybe about a gospel topic, like how God can do more with our lives if we yield ourselves to Him than if we try to go on our own. That would be something I'd be interested in talking about.
Interesting.
I'd always be happy talking about college football. I do like college football. I went to.
It's a good season for you right now, then.
That's right. I went to and now teach at like 3 major college football schools.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of part of my life. It wasn't actually until I ended up at these schools, but then once you get there, it's hard not to get sucked into it, right? I would love talking about First Amendment issues. So probably one of those 3 would be something I would go. And maybe parenting. I'm very passionate about my family and parenting. So
that's a good answer.
Talking a little bit about that history, like as you've skidded through these different higher learning institutions, during your master's, you were an editor for an online journal of like literature. What do you really remember from that time? And is there a book or a letter or a poem from there that's still like you remember to this day?
A lot of work by an author named Clint McCown, who was a professor of mine and who I really enjoyed, and I really enjoy his writing and learned a lot from his writing style. And then I just enjoyed, that was an opportunity to work with a lot of different types of writers. You have poets, short fiction, nonfiction, narrative nonfiction, and we had this online journal run through the MFA program where I was at called Blackbird, and it's kind of one of the premier literary journals for people trying to publish short form literature. And I just enjoyed seeing all the different types of submissions and things that came in, and the way artists think. It's just different, quite frankly, than the way maybe they're creative, right? They just think differently, and I enjoyed being in that space. Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, well, in that same vein, we are in the Deseret Book store in Salt Lake City, the flagship store. We like to recommend to our listeners and viewers a TBR, a to be read book to add to their list. Do you have one you recommend that you'd either have read or you'd like to add to your list as well from our collection?
So the one I'm excited about that's coming out is this book by Elder Bednar called Rock of Our Redeemer. I'm very much looking forward to that. And I like much of his writing. There's another book about how to receive personal revelation. I don't remember the title of it, but that one I think is incredibly valuable. And so I'm looking forward to that.
We'll add those. That's great. Thank you.
Also, I gotta say, everyone, like as soon as we sat down in the midst of these books, you were turned around and already
I know,
reading through like which Nibley books are sitting there. And
I would read. I would read all these books by Hugh Nibley, and I have read a lot of them, but I would be happy to get more. I've never seen a book I'm not interested in. I've always think it's actually a problem. So at the University of Texas, at the law school, at least the faculty members get a pretty robust like research account, and you can just use it to buy books or travel or whatever. I would guess 3 times a week I'm emailing my assistant and saying, order this book for me. Get this book. Let's get this book. And so I have all these books. The problem is I will never have enough time in my life to read all the books I keep ordering, but they all intrigue me. I love them. And so I'll at least read some of all these books to kind of get a sense of them. But yeah.
I like it. Okay, before we get to the very last couple of questions, but I do have this, I wanted to know, and this is personal, so you don't share anything about this if you don't want to. Side note. But could you tell us about this very sweet book dedication that you wrote? It says, "For John, see you on the other side."
Yeah, I don't mind sharing about that. So my brother passed away 2.5 years ago, roughly. And so I wanted to dedicate the book to him. And, that was kind of where that came from.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you.
Yeah. Although I would say probably to the extent I've developed some of these habits in my own life, it may be because he and I fought so much as children that I had to learn how to do the opposite, growing up or whatever. But that's what brothers do. Right?
It is what brothers do.
Yeah.
Many hair pulled from my brothers.
There you go.
What do you hope that people will take away from your book?
I hope they take away a desire to want to just incorporate these habits in their lives and recognize that, like any area of life where we're trying to improve, it's a lifelong process. It's not about just reading a book and then mastering these skills. It's something that all of us can spend our whole lives working on, along with other areas that we're trying to improve in. Right? We have a word for that. We call it repentance, right? It's a growth mindset of trying to improve our entire lives. These are areas where we can all improve if we're hopeful to be able to have better conversations with the people that we care about the most, right? And so my hope is everyone will come away with a desire to do that, but also have some very practical tips about how to move forward. I worked very, very hard in this book not to make it overly academic. I'm not trying to go off on all these various academic theories. It's just everyday practical tips that we can all incorporate to try to have better conversations, which I think as we look around in our world, we probably could all agree that would be a good thing to have more of.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, Stephen, thank you very much for sharing your passions and your book with us. It was so fun to sit down with you.
This is great. Thank you so much for having me.
Habits of a Peacemaker, 10 Habits to Change Our Potentially Toxic Conversations into Healthy Dialogues is available now at Deseret Book stores or available on the Deseret Bookshelf Plus, along with a lot of other great, fantastic, really the best books. We will see you next time on Out of the Best.